pleasure to introduce Reggie Aggarwal today. And now, I'm sure everybody knows Reggie's backstory. He's been around town, but Reggie used to work with me at Shaw Pittman. So in a way, I feel that I'm extra sponsoring this event, because if I hadn't driven Reggie from the law, Tien would have nobody sitting next to him to talk to. But seriously, Reggie has become one of our most successful entrepreneurs and really shows what it takes to become an entrepreneur in this community. While he was a lawyer, Reggie was also running the Indian CEO network way back in the day, for those of us who are old enough to remember, you know, before even Barack Obama became president. So time that didn't exist, actually, even before the internet. And so Reggie was running that network and realized that there was a real need in the market for a software product that would help him manage his events and still manage to be a lawyer at the same time. So Reggie created Cvent to do that. And it was a long road for Cvent. I remember there were years where you were in that hotbed of technology in the 300 block of North Glebe Road in Arlington, and just kept going and kept going. Eventually, Cvent was one of our most successful IPOs in the community. It's since gone private. And, you know, Reggie, I think, Reggie said, what can I say to introduce him? I've been trying to get stories out of his sister at the table in the front. She's really holding out. I don't have enough money to pay her to get the good Reggie stories.
Gotta pay enough.
Well, I'm only a poor lawyer, Reggie. I didn't become the client like you did. So that's why I'm introducing and you're passing on the words of wisdom. But, you know, for those who aren't aware, Cvent is now, we're closing in on 4,000 employees. So I guess after Amazon, they'll be one of our largest employers in the area. And Reggie himself was just named the #1 CEO in the SaaS industry by the SaaS Report, which is a big honor and a great reflection on Reggie and how far he and Cvent have come and where they're going in the future. And I will leave that to Tien and Reggie to discuss. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Welcome back, Reggie. Reggie was our second guest ever. We've done over 30 of these events in the last 7 years, and I think when we spoke last time, you were still private.
Oh yeah,
you were before your IPO, yeah. And I know we were kind of dancing around that. And,
yeah. I was definitely probably dancing because we weren't disclosing that.
Right, exactly. You're very quiet about it, and then boom, you know, it came out. But why don't we, you know, for the benefit of the audience, go back a little bit. So maybe where did you grow up, and you know, where did you go to college, and why did you choose to pursue a career in law initially?
Yeah, so I grew up locally. Originally, my father immigrated from India and then moved to Manhattan back in the 60s. Unfortunately, he put the wrong Manhattan because it was Manhattan, Kansas. So I think I doubled the Indian population when I was born. Not many Indians in Manhattan back then. But no, we lived all around, but basically we settled in Washington about 40 years ago. And I grew up in Alexandria, Virginia. I went to a local high school. I was just talking to one of the people here that I went to a local high school off Franconia Road, Edison. So I grew up here my whole life. And went to college at UVA, and then went to law school. And kind of came back and just kind of been here my whole life.
Why law? Did you have like tiger parents that were forcing you to become?
Well, you know, it's funny. I have a lot of strong views on how people pick careers. And unfortunately, we use small data points to pick careers. So on a personal level, I was on the debate team in high school. And everyone said, hey, you're a good debater. So as soon as they said that, you ought to be a lawyer. It just got in my head. And it's really those simple data points that you do something in high school that kind of puts you on a path. And so after graduating from Virginia, I was a finance major, and I just decided to go to law. It was a little bit tough environment because I graduated in '91. The recession was there, and I wasn't very educated on the market because I remember, for example, I was interviewing with some investment banks, and I didn't understand the difference between an investment bank and a bank. So my perception of a bank was the bank teller, not the bank teller itself, but just the banking system because I wasn't exposed to it. But in the end, I chose law because a lot of people just said you're a good debater. I did that, and then once I did that for 3 years, I wanted to try it out, and I enjoyed being a lawyer. But in the end, what kind of got me pivoting was when I started the Indian Soy Tech Council in '96. I started with a guy named Sanju Bansal, who was the co-founder of MicroStrategy. Basically, what I saw is I saw entrepreneurs, and I learned a lot. And the biggest thing I learned is that hey, they're no different than me, you know, because when you're their lawyer, and we have a lot of lawyers in the room, you get to know how smart your clients are. And your perception is CEOs are extraordinarily bright and super bright, and they're smart, but they're no smarter than you or I, is what I learned. And in particular, the Indian community, what I saw was that a lot of them were first generation. So what that meant is when they came here, they didn't have money, they didn't have a network, they didn't necessarily speak English that well, and certainly weren't the kind of CEOs where I thought were magnanimous. They were just hardworking, took risk. And so when I started the company, it was interesting to be surrounded by that group and see how successful they were. Because really what went through my head is, hey, I can do that also. And that was a large part of when I started CVent, was just being around entrepreneurs for events like this, that you meet people and you get a good idea and you say, hey, I'm going to try it also.
Tell me about the Indian CEO Council a little bit. I know that I tried to go to one event, and I'm Chinese, so I was turned away at the door. I think I told you this, right? This is like the second or third time, right? But what got you into that, and why, I want to figure out how to take CONNECTpreneur into some kind of a CVent-like event, go public too.
Sure. So what happened?
Lay out the blueprint for us.
Yeah. So what happened is that I learned a few lessons in life, which is networking. Let's start with just basics. So what I learned in networking is you have to learn, frankly, what other people want out of networking. So I'll tell you a couple things. So I'm going to give you my very honest opinion. So what happens when I come to networking events now that I'm a CEO of a larger company is that I meet a bunch of people, they give me their cards, and then about 15, 20 people call me up and want to have lunch with me. And what they don't realize is, I'm choosing between having lunch with you or someone who's worked with me for a decade who I've never had a one-on-one meeting with, or seeing my family, right? And so what I learned is if you give and give, then you'll receive. So when I started the Indian COI Tech Council, what I first started is that I would get a couple people to agree to come, and then I would invite other people and say, come meet this person, because they didn't want to meet me, but they wanted to meet maybe the CEO of another company. Actually, one of our original folks, Gion's in the audience, and Gian was the CTO of Cable and Wireless. And I remember doing a dinner, and everyone wanted to meet Gian. Why? He was the CTO of Cable and Wireless, and he bought a lot of software. So CEOs would love to meet Gian. So I didn't say come meet with me, it was more come meet with Gian, because Cable and Wireless was buying maybe he was in charge of $100, $200 million budget. So I think the biggest thing, what I just will give advice on networking, is see what the other person wants. And if you give and give, then you'll get something back. And so that's kind of what started it. Was I saw a bunch of people. There wasn't really this is 96, and people wanted to meet other people like them. So the way our format was, we had no speakers. So people like me right now wouldn't be speaking, and everyone was just networking. And they would meet other folks that were CEO level. And it was just Indian in the beginning. But then as we expanded, we invited non-Indians, and we kind of grew. And that's, of course, what made me think of starting CVent, because we sometimes would have 500 people. And Tien, you know this better than anyone, how hard it is to organize events, all the logistics. And I used to just use email and Outlook and Excel and yellow sticky notes. That was how I organized events. And so that gave me the idea.
And it started off great, right? You got lots of money, and you got some big time investors in, and late 90s, so everything was kind of rolling. So what was your plan with CVent? Was it always to serve other people like yourself who were putting on these B2B events, or did you want to hit the wedding industry, or what was your original concept of it? So a lot of things when you start a company, you think of what you know. And what I knew is business events. Think of events like this. So I knew that there was a reasonably large market out there, but I didn't realize how big it was. So I focused on what I knew, which was really events and marketing. Because what I learned is, how do you get 500 CXOs to come out to an event? And how do you market to them? And our CXOs were, from the CEO of Nextel, the CEO of Nortel, CEO of AOL, how do you get U.S. senators, but they don't get to speak? So the key is, how do you market to these people, get them there, and because then you build a group. So what I started is when I started the business, was really event registration and then event marketing. Because to me, it was all about packing the house with the right people. I wasn't focused on the logistics of the event, because that all works out once you have enough people coming. So that's how I started it. What I discovered was how huge the industry is. So I'll just give you some interesting stats, because we just had our board meeting, and I was talking to what our next 5-year plan is. So the global event industry is $1 trillion. There was a report that just came out about 6 weeks ago. And to put it in perspective, it's bigger than the GDP of every country in the world except 17. It's as big as consumer electronics. People don't realize how much money is spent on events, people traveling around the world. And so it was a very large industry. So once I got into it, I did what I knew, which is business events that were kind of more local. Then I started getting into the more corporate and national events, and just started realizing how big the industry was. And I frankly was lucky. I didn't
realize how big it was till probably a year or two into it. And just what I realized is there's just events everywhere for every industry, for every group you can think of. It was hard to quantify because most companies, like take Nike. Nike might spend $1 billion on events, but you don't think of Nike as an event company. So it was just an interesting, and just like anything, you peel back the onion, there was a lot of good stuff there.
And then the bubble came and burst, and give us a little bit of a highlight, because I know it hasn't all been,
Sure.
top of Mount Everest for you. You've gone through quite a bit, so take us through that.
So when you start the company in 99, you're surrounded by all the euphoria of the community, and then we saw a huge market, and the internet's changing everything. So we did what everyone did, is we ended up raising $17 million from about 140 investors, what I call the technology glitterati of the Washington area. And basically, we spent and we grew because that's what everyone was wanting. We obviously thought we can transform the world. And we grew from 6 employees, which was just a handful of us in the kind of beginning. I was self-funding most of it. And because I realized when I was a venture capital lawyer that, don't dilute. So we weren't diluting in the beginning. And I was just self-funding it, living with my parents' house in Alexandria. And just saved a lot of money. And just, my parents gave me money. I'm from a middle-class family. My parents worked for the U.S. government. And so then I took their, part of their 401k money. I shouldn't say took, they gave it to me. And as a good Indian son, of course I accepted that generosity. And anyways, but we quickly spent it, and then I raised money because everyone else was. And in our industry, about $1 billion of venture capital went into it. So we quickly we raised 17 million, grew from 6 to 125 employees. And, we were kind of, on our ways to becoming $1 billion revenue company in just a few years, is what we thought. And then as, many of you have read, what ended up happening is the dot-com hit, September 11th hit, reality hit. We'd blown through 16.6 million of the 17 million. So we had about $400,000 left in the bank. And, we had built a big fat 1.5 million revenue company because we were just basically spending it on hiring people. When you have 125 people, just you can do the calculation. And so then, we very quickly, I remember a guy named Jack Biddle at an event came up to me and literally said, what the F are you doing? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, there's a recession that's hitting. And I was a young guy. I never really lived it through a recession as a leader, so didn't understand it. And I didn't realize the ramifications, especially the 2001 recession. For the technology community, that was, to me, way worse than 2008. And it really was the Great Depression because 95% of the companies went under. So I didn't really couldn't anticipate that because all I saw was euphoria for most of my professional career. And so then, he said, you need to start clamping down. And then, and really, then all of a sudden the recession hits, everything hits at once. And, we barely made it through the recession. And there were a lot of, I hadn't taken a salary for 2.5, 3 years at any point, and I'm glad I had. And then we cut down to 25 people. And that was the most difficult time personally because it was even hard to get out of bed. I mean, I remember, when I was still living at home and just getting out of bed was tough because I'd lost so much money. For all my network and for all my friends. I'd laid off some of the best employees. A lot of them were smarter than me. And basically I'd been a bad leader. And, I didn't really know which way was up or down. I didn't know because I didn't know.
What kept you going? Like most of the entrepreneurs in the room, there's always tidal waves. Every day there's something going on. But what kept you sort of getting out of bed and fighting? What was it inside of you that kept you going?
So a lot of people ask that. And I think for me, it's simple. It's really what kept them there. Because I end up keeping, 9 of my 11 original folks are still with me today. Leaders, not the more junior people, because we have a bunch of them still. And so what I'll tell you, for me, it's easy because, look, first you start very pragmatically, which is my reputation, right? I had become obviously the face of Cvent. And I remember the Washington Post, and especially if you remember back then, when the newspapers carried all the media weight, because there's no social media, there's no blogs, there was really nothing. And the Washington Post chronicled Cvent. And we got it on the way up, and then we got it on the way down. And on the way down, it was brutal. And it was down because, you take it very personal because they're writing about me, saying I'm not a very good entrepreneur. And, and so it was an extraordinarily difficult time because when you go through personal tragedy, it's difficult. But when people are reading about your personal tragedy, then it gets even more difficult, especially when it's the Washington Post. So they wrote 9 front-page articles on the business section of Cvent. And so, and by the way, that was such a brutal experience for me. I didn't do an interview with any newspaper for a decade. So between 2001 and 2011, I didn't do one interview, except with our industry trade rags, you know, for the event industry. I didn't do any mainstream for a decade because it was that brutal, you know, to read the paper when you're already down and then to read that everyone's reading about how bad you're doing. And so, but I think getting back to the question is, you know, how did I get motivated? So one, just practically, I had a lot at stake, and it wasn't about, you know, all the money I put in and so forth. It was my reputation. So no matter what, we all, you know, any person's like, my reputation's at stake. You know, I raised money for my entire network. Every person I knew, my family to friends to, of course, my business network. Everything I worked my whole life for, I'd gotten money to put into CVent. So, you know, you owe it to them. You owe it to your employees, right? So there was really there's, you know, just the captain should go down with the ship. That was my view. So to me, what I did was nothing heroic. It's just practical. What was really heroic was my team.
Though. You didn't quit.
Yeah,
a lot of guys would have thrown it in. You know?
You're right. And but to me, that's just not the right thing to do because you have to ride it all the way through. And I'll tell you, I was an investor in a company that had the same issue, and they lost money. And I put about $100,000 into the company. He was a good friend, and I lost my money, but I didn't really care because what I saw is he worked to the end, and all I cared is that like he did everything he could, and so I felt no ill will, even though we lost $100,000 of my money, because he worked all the way through. And I shared to my experience that I'd went through. So my view is the captain needs to go to the last moment with the ship. So that was really nothing. What was really heroic was my team, right? Because they don't have the equity swing. They don't have the same pride. And I actually often ask them, you know, why they stuck around. Because they didn't have the upside. I was the vast majority owner of the company, all this other stuff. And really what I found out was two things. Again, practically speaking, they said, well, we were working too hard. You wouldn't let us go look for another job. So that was on a practical level. And very seriously, because we were literally working 90, 100 hours a week. I'll give you one story and I wish some younger people were here where these are the stories. I remember when you joined CVent, you know how you give 2 weeks notice. And I would never ask anyone not to give 2 weeks notice because I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me. But when they gave their 2 weeks notice, we required you to start the next day and come into work from 6:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. And if you didn't, we're like, you're not the right DNA. If you can't work for 2 weeks from 6:30 p.m. to 11 p.m. after your first job, your current job, you're not the kind of person who's going to change the world. So you can just go, you know, not join our company. And I'm not joking. This is how we viewed it. And this was a test for us if they're really passionate about CVent. And now you look here, you know, I can't even get people when we recruit people to really work past 6 o'clock, you know, on their prime job. And so it's interesting how the world back then was a very different world. But look, at the end, what I think for them, they stuck around because one, they were just in the thick of things. But two, you hire leaders who just don't believe in failure. That's not in their DNA. And so they've never really failed. And that doesn't mean because it's good to learn to fail, but to fail at that level. So I think they just kept on, just say, we're going to make this work. And they believed, and they were passionate. But it's really this DNA within you saying, I'm not going to fail. And you know those type of people who just are like a dog with a bone. They just won't give up. And that's the kind of people, luckily, I had recruited. And I didn't quite realize that when I recruited them. But, you know, I think the best of us comes out sometimes in adversity. And that's what I saw with my team.
Yeah, I mean, one of my mentors, Bill Walton from Allied, he invested in our company when we went through some bad times. And he said that the best entrepreneurs are the ones that can go through hell and survive it because they're going to be even better, which is exactly what happened to you. So take us through sort of, you know, you made it through the storm, and then up until maybe 6 years ago when we interviewed you. How did you grow the business? I mean, I know you went on sales calls one-on-one because I saw you do it. And I mean, but how did you build that business back?
So look, when you build a business, first we had a good market. And then for us, there were about 500 competitors that did exactly what we did. Online registration. Again, $1 billion of venture capital. People just don't realize how large this industry is. And even today, companies are getting funded who are competitors against us that do online registration. I'm just like, geez, this will never stop, that these VCs will continue believing in this space. And even when you have kind of, frankly, large companies like us or companies like Eventbrite, there's a bunch of larger companies, even though we're a little bit different. But look, so it starts with this. So I look at different phases. Phase one for us was the first couple of years where we just started the business. Phase two was we went through the recession and where we cut 80% of the people. But then we turned it around after about 18 months. And then we were the walking dead for about 3 years. So we grew from 26 to 27 to 28 employees between 2002 to 2004, right? So basically cut kind of even keeled. And the lesson learned is, kind of pick a north goal, a North Star. It doesn't matter how slow you go towards it, at least you're moving in that right direction was kind of the mantra of the day. And just keep out of bankruptcy. And we didn't raise any money, by the way, between 2001 and 2011 either. So no interviews and no raising money, because we're going to, after raising 17 million and blowing through that money, if we can't build this business, the best thing for our careers is to go do something else, because we're clearly not good entrepreneurs. But anyway, so kind of the walking dead, and that was just stabilizing the ship, right? And so what do you do there? The lesson learned there is just focus on the basics. Too many companies get fancy. Like, I'll tell you right now, when I talk with companies and they're 10 million in revenue and they're international, I'm like, everybody can tell you're going to fail. Why? Because your domestic market should be big enough. Going international is tough for us. My rule of thumb is, onto your 100 million revenue, don't go international. You only go international because your domestic market's not big enough. And if you can't grow to 100 million domestically, my view is you're certainly never going to be a multi-$100 million business. And I'm telling you, we're international hardcore. We have offices all over the world, and it's extraordinarily difficult for us. And so lessons learned is focus on basics. So what we did is we picked one market and be the best at it. We didn't go enterprise because they're very complicated. We did mid-market, domestic, online registration. Now we have like 8 or 9 products. So that was our kind of our strategy, which is just be the best at it, and then just focus on basic blocking and tackling. Like my mom would say back in 2000, hey, does it make sense to be spending more money to build a product than it takes to sell, than you can sell it for? Mom, that's old school thinking, right? And then you get back to the basics, which is, yes, you have to build something for less than what you sell it for. But you don't necessarily, with venture capital, have to do it in the first 2 or 3 years. But after 4 or 5 years, you need to aspire to that. So those are kind of the basics. And then look, everything is basic, which is you either build the product, sell the product, or service the customer. If you're not one of those 3 things, right? And then of course you have some support functions, but that's where we put everyone to. So as a CEO, of course, I went on sales calls and got very involved. But this is where my team has done really well, is because we learned the business. Because we, for 4 or 5 years, we were a very small company and we did everything. And we got very fundamentals. We're a very frugal company to this day. I still fly economy. We share rooms. We travel. I stopped sharing rooms only in 2013 after we went public, because my general counsel said it is not wise for you to share rooms with an associate, because if an associate ever just happened to say anything, well, you'd probably settle that for $500,000 just with just with anything that they might say. So then we all realized that our executives shouldn't be sharing rooms. So really, that's the frugalness, because it's still that core value of CVent, which is spend money on sales, marketing, and product and customer service, instead of stuff that really doesn't add value to the business. So I think we grew the business to the next phase, just focusing on the basics.
Right. And then you attracted some attention from, was it NEA?
So in 2011, NEA and Insight Ventures put in $136 million into the company, which at the time was the largest software investment in the country since 2006. It's funny now how things have changed. 136 million, don't get me wrong, is a ton of money, but it's not a lot now, because now people are raising 130, 150 left and right, but that was the biggest software investment in 6 years. So that was kind of the beginning of where mass money started going into companies. And I'll tell you all a secret, what really happened. We really didn't raise 136 million. 136 million came to us, but we only put $100,000 on the balance sheet of the company. 135.9 million went to go buying out our investors from 2000. People like Bob Dinkle's here, people like Gian, people who had invested in the company. They'd been in it for 11 years. They wanted their money, so really was cashing them out. So we'd become a very cash flow positive business, but really all we did was raise $100,000. So what I tell people, we really didn't raise money till 2013 when we went public. And so, but we just want to tell our competitors that we raised $136 million, which we did.
Scared them.
Just $100,000 went into the company.
Right.
So,
but that changed you guys, right? You took money from sort of the big boys, and that means something's got to happen down the road, whether it's a big exit or an IPO or whatever. You obviously knew that. How did that change your approach to the business? Because you had sort of adopted this post-recession block and tackle, kind of grow organically and build this solid business. And now you got venture coming back in, and you know what they want to do. So how did you square that in your mind? Were you not resigned, but were you committed then to go public or do something big?
So we first started money raising with angel money. It's called friends and family, angel, VC. Then now was private equity. NEA, they had just started a private equity outfit within NEA, and there was a firm called Insight Ventures, which was private equity, and these were kind of basically large-scale venture deals, but they had a little bit different view. So first, all through the stages, I found extremely valuable. Look, a lot of our successes are luck. I was lucky to find the kind of people that stuck through with me. I was lucky to find investors that were very patient with me and believed. And, and I think a lot of it was just because we stuck around and went through it, didn't take salaries. They psychologically want you to win because they say, boy, these people are making sacrifices, right? They're not taking advantage of the money. And then we raised private equity money. And what I found in the private equity, and again, it really wasn't, as I told you, only 100,000 went on our balance sheet, but what we got is a great board. And here's what I learned is people like, let's say NEA locally, everyone knows them, but where the value of NEA is that they see so many deals. We were just pivoting to mobile. And then they were like, you need to not double down, quadruple down on mobile, right, in 2011. Now it seems like an obvious, and we were investing a lot, but they see so much. They see so many transactions. They see where companies are doing what. So I felt like one of their big values was just telling you what the market's doing because they talk to hundreds of companies. The second thing is, at that point, we were starting to get in the zone of an IPO and just the kind of things we need to do to prepare because we had never done it, didn't know the kind of things that mattered. And you learn, there's a lot of things you learned about going public. And you really can, just like any of the entrepreneurs here can say, boy, I can tell someone who's a startup, I can give them 20 lessons. Just like now, I can tell people 20 lessons that you absolutely can't violate when you're thinking of going public. And they're so obvious to me now, it wasn't then. So to have them there. But I think the other thing is that was the first time that we actually had like an ally. We really felt like we were doing it alone because our VCs and our angels were the original ones and we had lost their money. So CVent had zero value until 2007. So for 8 years, our equity was worth zero. And look, my salary was zero the first 2.5, 3 years, and then my salary was $80,000 for the next 2 or 3 years, and then I made a six-figure salary for the first time in 2007, and my equities were at zero, and then my leaders, which I'm going to go back to, their salaries were probably a 35% discount, 40% discount of what their market was, and they did this for 8 years, and their equities were at zero till 2007 because we had the overhang of our 17 million that compounded and all this stuff. And so it was interesting look, what I tell people, CVent has been a very big success in the area, but 8 years we're worth nothing to the employees and we're successful. So imagine how long it takes to create value. And, now luckily we went like this and then we went like this practically, right? Because now our value the creation of value was a lot. And part of it was the market started recognizing we were a SaaS cloud-based company in 99. No one knew what that was in 99, right? Everyone's talking about cloud in the last 10 years. We've been doing it we haven't changed our model. So a lot of people didn't understand the cloud model, so they didn't get the valuations maybe. But my point is that it takes a long time to build a business. And just for our story, for the first 8 years, we created no net new worth for the employees and basically just a little bit for our investors. It was those last 2 or 3 years where things just went like this because it was just that compounded growth. We were growing about 50% at the time, so you compound 50% over 3 years. That becomes a very large number. Yeah.
And then going public, we've had some public CEOs on the stage before, but what are the top 2 or 3 big changes that you had to make as a CEO now that you were under the scrutiny?
So look, here's a couple rules I've learned. We're as Andy mentioned, we're starting to approach 4,000 employees around the world. We have about 1,100 here in the DC area. So I spend about 60% of my time on HR. Okay, because to me
60.
Yeah, because maybe it's more like 40, but it's more than any other division. And I'll tell you why. And I'll say this to our customers at our customer summit. I say, hey, I could always get a customer. That's easy. What ain't easy is to get a good employee. You get a good employee, they'll get you 100 customers. So to me, scale is all about good employees. It's not about customers because good employees will get you good customers, will service them, will read what their pain points are, and develop products that solve their pain points. That's what a good employee does. So to me, it's all about employees. And so for me, I interviewed our first 1,000 employees, probably 90% of them, because I would spend about 70% of my time the first 8 or 9 years. I'd go down to every college. Until just 5 years ago, I went into every college we recruited at, UVA, Virginia Tech, JMU, Penn State. You name the school, I'd personally go to recruit because you really need to again, build the DNA of your companies, your people.
How many public company CEOs do you know that do that?
So, again, I stopped doing it actually when we went public because it was just, at that point, it's about 35% of my time went to public stuff. So I stopped doing it, and plus you build the right DNA and you have it. There's the old saying, A players hire A players, B players hire C players, C players hire F players. Once you become a large organization and you have C players, it's impossible to root it out. You don't even know who the C players are till it's too late in your organization. So to me, you can never really deviate from that as you scale, because you can never figure it out. So luckily we built the right foundation. So, and whether you're small, you don't have to be large. It's just people is everything. And I learned that in the tragedies we went through. And if I had to pick one thing that says, what do you do to build a great business? It's just, find great people. And great people means you really have to understand their motivation and understand, why they're there. Are they long-term thinkers? Like at Cvent, we do something very counterintuitive. Our vesting schedule for our equity, which we've had for a decade, is 0, 0, 75, 25. My view is if you're not with me for 3 years, you haven't created value. I don't want to give you a piece of the company. We gave 100, every person got equity in the company. We believed in that, but it was 0, 0, 75. Silicon Valley is you start vesting after the first quarter. And I get that because the market's different, but I was just given a different viewpoint. That's how we've done it for a decade. And we've been able to retain our people because we find the people that come in and want to build something. And we say, if you don't want to build something like an institution, you're probably not the right person, because I just don't know anyone who worked with us for 18 months. It's like, who cares? I don't even know who that person is, because they didn't really build what we are. So we had a lot of lessons we learned on HR that have really worked for us. But my view is that that's where you over-index on, is the people and retaining them, motivating them, asking them, be very realistic with them. So that's some of the things. But getting back to the IPO question. So the lessons learned there, of getting ready for an IPO is this: it really comes down to predictable revenue. And that's where SaaS markets have done well, because you're very predictable. So, we're very predictable in our revenue. We've really put a lot of energy. There's a group called FP&A. I never even heard of that, financial planning and analysis. Literally never heard of it in 2010, because, I was a lawyer and no one ever taught me it. No one ever told me it, so I didn't know to ask. And so your FP&A team does your budgeting and forecasting. And if you have a good team there, that's what makes your IPO successful, in terms of predicting. But look, I don't have great lessons to learn except from the IPO, except that, which is focus on building a great business that's consistent. That's what the public market wants. And the second thing is to invest in the systems that let you scale, which is hard to do when you're small. Wait till you're the right point and do that. And there's a lot of other ones that are probably nuanced that most of the audience wouldn't find that interesting. But those are probably 2 or 3 of the areas that I've learned lessons on.
Excellent.
And doing it.
So you were public for how many years?
So we went public in 2013, public for 3 years. And things were going well. And then we got approached by a strategic buyer, a corporation, and we still can't disclose who those were because we're under NDA. But a company was interested in buying us, so they started talking to us. We weren't looking to sell. We were happy how things were growing. We were growing. Our last 3 years as public, we grew on average of 32% per year, and we were doing about 15% EBITDA. Some of you might know the magic number. What they do is they add your growth rate, 32, plus they add your EBITDA percentage, which for us, let's say was 15. So it's a 47 or a 48. So the way companies work is that when you go public, there's a rule that says if you can get to 50, you're an incredible company. In other words, if you're growing 50%, but then you're flat in EBITDA, that's 50 plus 0, you're 50, great company. A little bit balanced. You don't want to grow 90. Well, actually, you could grow 90% and lose 40% EBITDA. You'd be a great company because your number is 50. So those are some little rules of thumbs that you learn just to give you a guess. And there's a little bit of balance. And so we were doing really well as a company, and we were pretty happy with how things were going. But then we get approached, and look, the market started to turn, but we didn't even engage with them. I turned down the offer. But then we had another company approach us, and then we hired Morgan Stanley to talk to him, because then it's like, okay, we have 2 companies that have put bids in on Cvent. We should at least see where this goes and see what kind of price we can, frankly, extract, right? Because you owe it to the shareholders, right? And so then that's how the process started.
And then the process then it culminated with a private equity fund,
Sure.
Vista,
Yep.
which is a pretty well-known group. And why did you choose them, or was it purely price or economics, or were there other strategic reasons?
So just real quick, when you're a public company, it's very simple. You have a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder value. Shareholder value can be maximized in 3 ways: price, speed, or certainty. So when someone buys you, you don't just have to go with the highest price, because you can say they're less likely to close. So let's just say SAP is going to buy you. SAP has a reputation of closing 99.9% of the deals once they put an offer to a public company. Because when you put an offer for a public company, it always closes because they have all your numbers, they know about it, and you just can't close a deal unless there's a massive problem. Which again, literally out of 1,000 companies that were bought, probably 5 didn't go through. So if you're being bought by a public company, it's going to go through because they have all your numbers and there's nothing to hide. So what happens is when you're looking to sell, price and then speed, because some companies take 4 weeks to due diligence, some companies take a few days. Vista put a bid on us, so I'll tell you the process. What happened? So we got 2 bids. Then we're like, we got a process. They're all trying to force you to sell as quick as possible before you can get out there. You of course push back and say, well, I got to talk to my board. My board's out of town. We're busy. It's my anniversary. You got to make whatever excuses you can. And you're just trying to basically get out there, talk to others, right? So then we went on a roadshow, and then we met with a bunch of CEOs. And another lesson that you have to do, because I've been talking to a lot of companies, is you need to have already figured out who your other buyers are. You already should have built a relationship a year in advance. So because that happens. You call them up, you say, boom, do you want to buy me in a week? Multi-billion dollars. So you had to have an existing relationship. And so I'd spent a lot of my time just always getting to know the folks, because you want to map yourself, because at some point you have to exit, or you just want to strategically meet them. So let's say I met the CEO of SAP. So, Bill McDermott, let's say. I built a relationship with Bill as an example. He was actually our keynote speaker at our user conference. And plus this, because I want to sell SAP stuff. So either way, I want to get to know him, because sell him, they can resell, or they could be an exit, let's say. Or it could be, you can name a bunch of companies. I'm just picking a large software company. So you build a relationship. So then we went on the road, and in 1 week, I met with the CEOs of a bunch of the largest software companies, or, very large companies. And then we got another bid. So we ended up having 3 bids. There was a bid off. We ran it, but Morgan Stanley ran it. And basically, we gave a deadline, and they're bidding, and they're all going up. And basically, at 1 a.m. on Saturday morning, we picked Vista. Now, they were the highest price, but the speed of deal, the other companies wanted 3 weeks to close. Vista said we'd close on Sunday. And when I say close, meaning they'd sign their due diligence.
Wow.
They didn't have to do due diligence. They just said, well, we picked us on Saturday, we'll close on Sunday. And we want to announce on Monday morning.
Had they been tracking you for a long time?
Yeah, so let me tell you 2 things. One, they owned our biggest competitor. And so they knew how good we were, because they bought our biggest competitor up here. We were down here. But in the 3.5 years they owned them, we frankly kicked their butt and became the number 1. So they loved the space, and they said we bet on the wrong horse. We wanted to buy. So they knew us already, because we were frankly killing them. Yeah. And so that was one. And then the second thing is that's the Vista model. They act at speed. They close things like you won't believe, and they put pressure like you won't believe. And that's the way to do it, what I've learned, because I was like, basically I skipped, I tripped, and I sold the company. Just boom, it just happened so quick. And at the time, I'll tell you, so here's a couple things, and I'll be very honest. So at the time, the market was April 15th, so the market was starting to go down like this. And I thought, it's been a great market for the last 7 years. Maybe the market's going down. The multiples people were getting were, in my view, historically just crazy. Now, 2.5 years later, it doesn't look so crazy, because it's been sustainable. But we got a 71% premium on our stock, which was the highest premium ever paid for any company since 2001 that had $1 billion plus valuation. And so how do you turn down a 71% premium? So then, frankly, what went through my head is, don't be that guy. Don't be that guy who gets too cocky. We sold for $1.65 billion. It was a great exit, great run, and who knows what will happen in the world. And so that was one of the reasons we sold. Now, I went with my leadership team, and look, we've been running for 17 years, and we run hard, and people were tired. And, so there was a lot of reasons you do that. But now the best thing about getting bought by private equity was we get another swing at the plate. So we sold the company, and then our whole entire 48 of my 50 top leaders are still with the company 2.5 years later. So I've only 2 people left. Of course, they all swore when we sold we'd leave, because, a lot of people made a lot of money, but they still worked because they didn't realize their passion for the company. And to find that kind of group of people, I'm extraordinarily lucky. But the point was, we end up selling to them because they gave us the highest price, the fastest close. But most important to me is I still wanted to keep running. I wasn't frankly ready to sell, but the price was too high. And so now we got another swing at the plate. And frankly, look, I'm going to be very honest, is that as an entrepreneur, it's great to see the Cvent brand continue to grow. If it got bought by a strategic, they might change the name, it gets subsumed, you kind of lose your independence. Here, we're completely independent. We have a board. It's not that different than being public where I had a board. So it's been a great win for us because we're able to continue to grow the business. And, there's still a lot of wealth creation that's left in the company because PEs give an extraordinary amount to the team, because they're just like, we buy a company, give a lot to the leadership team, and then now Vista's very active, but still at the end of the day, they know it's about the leadership. And so there's still a lot of opportunity to run the business and create wealth. So then my team stuck, plus they loved it. So it's been a win-win for us with private equity. And so I'm a big fan of private equity, in particular with Vista, because we've had an extraordinarily good run. They've been extraordinarily generous to us. Matter of fact, they own 54 companies. I was just on, they just sold Marketo. Some of you might have heard of Marketo. They just sold for almost close to $5 billion. I was on their board of directors as an example. They invest in their CEOs by training them a lot and doing a lot of things. And, it's been a great leadership growth for me as well, to run under an administration that have bought 300 companies. And so it's been really good. And so my team is able to continue to grow. We de-risked it. So it worked out well for us.
Yeah, it really has. And we had Don Berger, who's the CEO and founder of Social Tables, earlier this year. And apparently a week after CONNECTpreneur, you guys stepped up and bought them.
Yeah.
So what did you see in them? Are you going to change your corporate colors to pink now, or what?
So those know Don, it's company's called Social Tables. I can't disclose the price. The press speculated it was $100 million, to give you just a sense. And they're about 110 people in DC. And basically what they do is they do table management, which again, you're going to be like, what the heck, table management? But that's probably going to be a $500 million space, just to put a perspective, not in terms of revenue, but the value of, let's say, that asset. And what it does is it sets up this room. So imagine this room, they might do 2 events in this room every day, and this room has to be set up. But imagine there's 6 rooms like this in this hotel. Take a year, someone has to arrange this room, all the rooms here, 2,700 times in a year. And they have to coordinate that with the caterer, the AV. You guys start getting, it's pretty complicated. Take that times 10,000 hotels. There's a lot of movement going on. It's like furniture movement when you design your house. But anyways, so that's what they do. Built a good business. And we've been talking to Don. We were actually, frankly, now I could say it, we were about to buy them before we got bought. So we already been talking to them years before. And we were literally still considering buying them during our being bought process. But then we thought it would muck up too much complication. But so we've been talking for a long time. Great company. Don's still with the company. I hope he stays. He's a great entrepreneur, and we plan to continue growing them. It's been interesting because we bought a bunch of companies, and Don's the first one that's local, and the value of buying a local company is tremendous. Just the synergies and the chances of success are huge, because the other places we bought, Portland to Austin to Chicago, it's just painful to go back and forth, and you don't get the same kind of relationship building that you get when you have a local company. And so it's been great to buy a local company. I would put a premium of 10 or 15% on a local company on a valuation now, because if I could buy local, the chances of success and integration is way higher, and culture is way higher. So that's just an interesting lesson I learned. Just like now I put a discount on a location of an office. If it's too difficult to get to, it's difficult, to get there. And if you don't get your people there, you never integrate, and they keep their own culture, and then it doesn't ever work that as well.
Sudhakar Keshavan from ICF has the same philosophy. He wants to buy locally. Yeah, he cited a lot of the reasons you did. We'll open it up for a couple of questions. I know we're running a little bit late, but I want to ask a question about what's next. So you got Vista, they're PE, right? PE's always at some point down the road looking to do something. So same question I asked you 6 years ago, when's the IPO? And can I get in on the friends and family round?
Yeah. You have to talk to Vista about that now. I don't give those shares out the way I used to. No. So here's a couple things. So a lot of people have been asking me what's next. I'm going to tell you one thing that, again, I've learned is I don't have a next. I don't even think of it. It's literally not even one inch in my brain. All I think about is how am I going to make Steven successful, and I don't think of anything else, like literally nothing. And I'll tell you, that's one of the keys to our success is my whole leadership team is that. All we do is obsess about Cvent. That's all we think about. We don't think about other things. We don't think about what our next bet is, because we're all in all the time. And I mean that. So my view is that I don't even think about it. I'll wait till that exit comes, because there will be an exit at some point. We might go public. There's all kinds of things we can do. Vista's got a couple companies in the zone of going public. They're about to next year. And so my point is that for me, there is no next, because all I care about is what I'm doing with Cvent, and then I'll I'll think about that after it's over. It might take but you never know. Maybe there's a third round. You know, I was telling my team that it's not going to be over the second. You're going to say you're going to want to leave, but depends what happens in the third round. If we go public, you know, maybe you'll stick around to do that again, because it's been fun and we've been learning a lot, and it's
You're
been
still
enjoyable.
young and you've got a ton of energy.
That's right. I'm
I want
only
to know what
32
you
years
eat for
old.
breakfast every morning.
That's right.
Yeah. I think we have time for a couple questions. Reagan's got the mic. Anybody have any burning? Okay, we have a question over here at the RSM table.
Thank you. My name is Allison Shapira. I teach public speaking and presentation skills. And my question for you is thinking about companies that are smaller and scaling, companies in the 7 to 10 employee space. Given what you've learned building and scaling larger companies, coming back again to those basics, where do you go in the smaller space wanting to grow?
So you mean the basic skill sets you think you need?
For scaling.
So I think the basic skill sets, you know, when you look at scaling an organization, is first, again, starts with the people. There's only so much you can train people. They have to kind of, in my view, they have to have at least 80 or 90% here. Then you need 10 or 20% to unlock it, or just kind of give them the right path, because they have the right kind of instinct. So that's the first thing, is get the right people. The second thing, there's a rule that I've heard, and I believe it, which is 80% of the people that got you from here to here aren't the same people that get you from here to here. Now, we've bucked that. We've actually reversed it. 80% of people have taken us from here to here, and it's the same people. But generally speaking, 80% of the people aren't the right people. So that's the first thing, is the people. The second thing is the process. I'm going to give you like 2 or 3 technical, there's a lot of process I didn't learn, I didn't know about. So for some of the entrepreneurs here, there's something called the PMO office. I remember a bunch of directors, meaning at Cvent, they were the one level below VP. I always meet with them, and they came from a lot of different companies, from Accenture to big companies. And I always ask them, what are the things you learned at your companies that we're not doing? So let's pick the best practices in. And they brought up PMO, and I was like, what's a PMO? This is in 2011. And they said a PMO is the project management office. They're the ones who kind of help projects that are cross-functional. Because right now, if you're the head of sales, maybe you jump on the grenade of a project that goes across all the divisions, but we had no person that really catered those. So there's 3 or 4 areas, like the PMO office. It's creating scalable processes, and they're going to help you define processes and systems. The other thing we did wrong is we have an India office. I have about 1,400 employees in India. So whenever we had a problem, we're like, just hire an Indian, frankly, because I can hire 5 of them to every American. So we throw bodies at process problems instead of software to solve them. So in other words, automation. So scaling is about people, process, and systems. And so we focused really good on people. We end up developing processes, but they weren't systemized. And now our huge mantra for the last 3 years is automate, automate, automate. And because we could hire people cheaply, we didn't focus. When you have little resources, you focus on how to do it efficiently and how to automate it, because you have to. You can't hire a body to do it. So those are the 3 things that you need to do to scale. And then the last thing you need to do is globalize. So people, process, systems, globalization. I told you my rule of thumb, 100 million, then you go global. And if you pick global, it's simple. You just pick the English-speaking countries. That's the only way to do it, in my view. Don't get caught up in one customer bringing you there. It's again about focusing and penetrating your domestic market, because it is so much. It's triple the cost and energy for every dollar internationally, the revenue, your first 50 million, is my view. So those are kind of what I would say about scaling.
Scott, right here in the front row, Reagan.
Thanks, Reggie. That's a great story. My question, you mentioned Cvent success. What objectives or metrics do you guys focus on that define success these days for Cvent, and how has that changed over time?
So good question. To the young woman's question about the other one I should have brought is KPIs. Look, when you're small, you don't need to do KPIs, because as the executive, as the CEO or whatever, one of the leaders, you can see what everyone's doing and see if they're doing it relatively efficient. As you scale, you can't. You have to rely on reports and analytics and just obviously metrics, right? Plus it aligns everyone. So in terms of KPIs is the biggest thing that you define, and that's what you're talking about. But you have to give KPIs for every division and subdivision and individually. That definitely drives behavior. The example I say is, if you're on a treadmill and you didn't see the time or the speed, it's very tough to stay on it for a long time. So you need to measure it. And we've all heard, if you can't measure it, it doesn't happen, right? So I would say that I guess the question was about what objectives and what goals. Okay, so the highest level, what are our objectives? So we're still a growth company. So I'll just tell you the market. Just last night, I met with a guy named Colin Stewart. He's came to the office. He's the vice chairman of Morgan Stanley. He's the head of capital markets. And I asked him this very question: What's the public markets valuing growth right now? So here's a couple things. So one, BlackRock had a report that came out, if you saw it, and they said there's an 18% chance of a recession in 19, 38% chance in 20, 55% in 21. It's interesting. I've not seen anyone just put a number to it. I asked Colin, what's Morgan Stanley's view of a recession? Their view is a very high probability of a recession, but it would be closer to 21 because in the presidential election, there's never a recession because they do everything artificial to keep the economy good. So unless we have it in 19. So that was kind of interesting. But now that we're kind of, at some point, we're going to have a recession. I look around the room, got a lot of people who've had hopefully some experience. We know a recession is going to happen. It's too good right now, and it can't sustain. So, but right now, if you were to go public, let's say in 19, generally speaking, you would take $1.50 of $1.50 for every dollar of revenue. Within a reasonable number, you'd be willing to spend $1.30 or 40 of expense. So in other words, it's still a growth market. Companies get valued at growth and multiples. So take Marketo. We just sold it. I was very deeply part of the process. We just closed 6 weeks ago, and it sold for something like 12 times revenue, right? Forward revenue. Their 19 revenue. And so the reality is we're still in a growth market. So the way Cvent's doing its business is we're focused on growth. So the biggest fight I have with Vista is, and this is going to shock you, like literally this is shocking. Our bonus is a reverse bonus. If our EBITDA is too high, we lose our bonus. Because we're such a frugal company, they're like, you're too damn frugal. You need to spend more. So if you don't spend enough, we're going to take away your bonus. So you better spend and grow, because I want you to grow and grow. This is very interesting for a typical P. Everyone thinks they're EBITDA centric. So the growth equity companies like Vista, which is now their new mantra, it's about growth. So invest, invest, invest. And that's the mantra. So look, small companies is different, medium's different, but just the point is we're still in the growth economy, and people, look, I know a lot about the small market because the smaller companies, I'm buying companies. So when we bought Social Tables, of course we looked at 10 other companies, we looked at all these different metrics, and the reality is you pay on growth still for software companies. And that is the mantra, at least till we get closer to a recession. Then people will start focusing a little bit more on cash flow. It's starting to change, for sure. We started talking about multiples of cash, but it's still a revenue multiple economy, generally speaking, if that's what you're asking.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank you for coming and sharing your morning with us. And you're going to stick around a little bit? We have 6
absolutely.
presenting companies, not 7, 6. It'll go pretty quickly. And they're all pretty promising companies. But let's give it up for Reggie for a great...
Hey, Tien, I want to say one thing. I want to thank you for putting this on, because people don't realize how important your ecosystem is. And I look around the table, Mike Liabro, Take Us Public. I look at Andy, who was a mentor when I was at Shaw Pittman. I talked about Guillaume, Bob Dinkle, my sister, who was one of our original founders and was with us 14 years at our SVP. I look at people like Esther, who was just here, the Secretary of Commerce, that's been helpful in my career. So it's just surrounding yourself with the ecosystem is almost as important as finding the right management team. So thanks for doing this, because this is what people meet, a lot of people that are going through the same difficult times.
Yeah. Well,
So,
thank you. That means
thanks.
a lot coming from you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Thanks. Appreciate it.